Welcome to Bottled Petrichor. In this new series, we sit with experts and learn how to navigate tools and resources necessary for students and researchers in Islamic studies. Our expert today is Dr. Hannoosh Steinberg, Visual Resources Librarian for Islamic Art and Architecture at Harvard University. And she will be telling us about online visual resources. Welcome, Amanda. How are you?
Great, thanks. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm very, very happy to have you on today. And I'm looking forward to a very exciting and informative discussion. But before we start, do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Of course. And thank you for having me. I'm really excited. I feel like there's not a lot of resources out there like this, especially on video for people to be able to see what's going on and finding these resources. So yeah, my name's Amanda Hannoosh Steinberg, and my job right now is specifically Visual Resources Librarian for Islamic Art and Architecture at the Harvard Fine Arts Library. I'm also the interim bibliographer for Islamic Art and Architecture at the moment. And in my former life, I was I did my PhD at the University of Pennsylvania, studying Arabic literature, specifically medieval Arabic popular literature. But while I was completing the PhD, I got a job at George Washington University in their library as sort of an all-service Middle Eastern studies librarian, and absolutely fell in love with it. So once I completed my dissertation, I decided to stay on the librarian track, and now I'm here at Harvard doing a really cool job that doesn't exist in many places, being able to specifically deal with visual resources and help people incorporate them into their work and manage Harvard's incredible collections.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. We can just go ahead and get started. So generally speaking, most US college campuses, a lot of these Islamic Studies graduate programs, they have amazing libraries and amazing librarians. What are some of the benefits of having a very good relationship with your librarian?
Yeah, I mean, what aren't the benefits? I completed most of my PhD without having a very close relationship with our Middle East Studies librarian, and I really regretted that because they are the experts, not only in information literacy, so how to sift through the massive collections that most of these institutions have, but also they've collected all of the stuff related to your subject area. So you can come to us with what you think is your question and end up finding resources that you didn't even know you were looking for. I had a colleague at George Washington who used to call librarians bibliotherapists because every time we would meet with a student in our offices, they would go away with, a better understanding of what they were actually looking for and what they wanted to write about. And it's just a massive benefit for both of you. That means you can inform the collections at your university if you know the librarian. It means that they can tell you what's there. And it's a relationship that can last far beyond the university. We care about our graduate students just as much as the faculty do. We've helped you guys throughout all 4 years, and are always really excited to work with graduate students because you have such fun and intensive research problems. And the benefits are really endless, I think. So reach out to your librarians, and also if you don't have a dedicated subject librarian related to your field of study, Islamic studies, for example, there aren't a lot of specifically Islamic studies librarians. A lot of us are on social media. A lot of us are willing to help people with questions if we're able to. Obviously, we have to prioritize our own students first, but we want to get this knowledge out there, and we want to help as much as we can. So be friends with all the librarians, your librarians and other librarians. That's always my advice.
Thank you for that. Yes, and Amanda is on social media, and I will be sharing her Twitter account wherever I do share this video. What exactly do visual resources entail? What type of questions, research necessitates a good understanding and good ability to really navigate visual resources in Islamic studies? And I guess more generally, how do we use visual resources to write properly about history, intellectual or otherwise, of a place, period, person, idea, or whatever? Yeah, I know it's a bit of a large question, but There it is.
Um, so it is a large question, and it's a lot of what I do. And you know, the Fine Arts Library generally works with the History of Art and Architecture department at Harvard, but we are open to the entire university. And part of what I have been doing in the past several years is making sure I have outreach to other departments as well, because it's not just art students who should be using images, especially if you have images available to you. So there are lots of different types of visual resources that could be relevant for research. Most universities will have some sort of image archive, which will be photographs, some copy work from books from the days before the internet, but also now, you know, already pre-digitized and ready for you to use. A lot of museums photograph their objects as well. So obviously that can be helpful. And you know, architecture. They're all dealt. The interesting thing about working with images is that every type of image of an artwork or architecture or a book or an object, they all sort of have different rules about them. You know, which institutions will have images of them and how you can use those images and who you have to ask and what the copyright situation is. So a lot of libraries will have specifically visual resources librarians to deal with that. So my position is very rare because it's specifically for Islamic art and architecture, but we also have a visual resources librarian in general who deals with requests from all around the university. And a lot of libraries will have that, and they're the person to reach out to if you're thinking you want to use images in your research. And I do have a little presentation that I sort of give to the Harvard Islamic Studies department every year, sort of about why you would use images in Islamic studies and how to use them, if you want me to launch that now.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so this is sort of a tweaked version of a presentation I give to the Islamic Studies program at Harvard. Each year they have sort of a session on finding resources. So I've cut out the Harvard specific things so that it's helpful to everybody. But it is a question I always get. And the first question I always ask at this session is how many of, and this is all graduate students, is how many of you have used images in your work? And sometimes I'll get like one person or two people. But, you know, as someone who worked in literature and history, like I get it. Images seem complicated to get the rights to publish. You don't really know how. And they don't necessarily seem essential. And maybe they're not essential, but I think they add a lot to work in any field. So, so first of all, why? A lot of people take images for granted, I think. You know, many historians and religious studies scholars, they'll see images as merely decoration, but there are other important ways that they can be useful. So the first is obviously for primary source study, for hard to access manuscripts or sites that no longer exist. So obviously it's better to see these things in person if possible. You know, anything you're studying, it's good to see it in the flesh, if you will. But digital image collections at museums and libraries, they allow for close study of objects without the danger or difficulty or impossibility of having to go to where they live. So on the left is the Temple of Bel at Palmyra, which was destroyed in 2015. And the reconstruction of this site, it's being rebuilt. And the reconstruction is actually being guided by digital image collections. So the people who are, you know, rebuilding the sites, it's relying on pictures on Flickr, on the internet in general, and on museum and library collections. Things that people would have thought, well, yeah, you can take a picture of that, but it's better to go and see it. Sometimes you can't. And it's important to have this documentation and to have it from a reliable source. And I actually get requests like this all the time from people doing restoration works on mosques in Turkey. You know, they want to have reference images, and we have photographs of how these things were from the early 1900s, and then how they've changed over time. And on the right is the famous Blue Quran, which was disassembled and dispersed at one point. And if you wanted to, examine all the images together to compare them, the only way to do that would be to do it digitally. And that's actually, I might talk a little bit about this more later, but that's sort of like a project that I might be working on coming up, but I won't talk about that yet. So another reason is a demonstration and analysis of religious imagery and motifs. Image is important in Islam. There's a big, there's debate. There have been debates over this for a long time. So it's important to know what images do exist. On the left is a cup with a pseudo-Arabic inscription, which I love pseudo-Arabic. I just think it's the most interesting thing that Europeans found the script to be so beautiful that they wanted to imitate it, but obviously not important enough to actually learn how to write it. So they would just sort of, copy the loops and swirls and use it as decoration. And it even fools, some of them are so good that it even fools people who know Arabic, but are like, well, maybe I just can't understand it because it's stylized. But no, that's nonsense. That's a nonsense phrase. It's just looks beautiful on the cup. So on the right are three images of or depictions of the Prophet Muhammad. The one on the furthest left is a calligraphic portrait that doesn't have figural depictions at all. And then the other two are different kinds of figural depictions, one with the face obscured and one without the face obscured. And these visual depictions are really important for tracing how thought about various prohibitions or lack thereof has changed over time. And are great for illustration and inspiration. It's not a bad thing to make your presentations more beautiful. The first time I ever went to an art history conference, I was blown away by the fact that people weren't just standing and reading their papers, like at my first Mesa conference that I attended, and that their presentations were much more engaging and beautiful, and that keeps people's attentions for longer. And for Islamic studies, I mean, Islam has some of the most beautiful artworks I've ever seen. And it's, to use them as illustration for the things that you're studying and talking to people about, there's nothing wrong with that. And again, the librarians are there to help if you're sort of afraid to use anything that you're not sure about the rights status or anything like that. So next, I was going to move on to sort of where you find these images. So there are a few links here, and I don't know if we can share this presentation after the fact, but I'm happy to if we think it would be helpful. I wrote an image guide for the Khazina blog on sites to find visual resources for Islamic history specifically, but really it's Islamic studies. It's anything. I tried to keep it really broad. And some highlights are the Aramco World Image Archive for more modern stuff. There's over 40,000 images from that magazine that they've made available on their website. The Islamic Painted page for manuscripts. ArcNet, which is not only architecture, but largely architecture. It's run by MIT's Aga Khan Documentation Center. Although a lot of their images come from our collections as well. So it's been a collaboration over time, although they definitely run the website. And the Library of Congress Prints and Photographs collection is also a really great site. And has, around 75,000 prints and photographs that you can freely download for your research as long as you give them credit. The other thing to know about is Gallica. Google Books is an excellent resource if you're trying to find citations or quotes or whatever from books that you're looking for. The great thing about Gallica, which is the digital repository of the BNF, is that they digitize everything in color and keep the illustrations. Google at times has had sort of they didn't know what to do with images, and sometimes they would black them out. Other times they were just scanning them so fast that they're really poor quality representations. But Gallica, if you're looking for illustrations from books, that's the place to go look first. And there are a few new resources this year that are really useful, I think. The first is the Hamsin site, which is the Historians of Islamic Art Association's open access website that features short videos for teaching, introducing Islamic art concepts. I did a video for them introducing one of our open access collections that I'm really proud of, the Stuart Carey Welch collection. So you should definitely go check that out. It's really useful for teaching. And next is the Digital Library of the Middle East. This project has been in the works for a really long time and just launched this past year. So its original goal was to gather digital representations of objects from museums that were maybe in danger. It was meant to be sort of a compromise between the, oh, there's war in this country, let's go take all their artifacts for safekeeping and never give them back. And okay, but maybe they'll actually get damaged there. So they don't actually take the artifacts, they photograph them and put them in this repository. But then they incorporated a lot of other things too, and it's really broad, and they have stuff from our museum and stuff from a lot of museums around, from our museum and our library, and stuff from around the world too. It's still a prototype, so it can be a little buggy, but it's a really great resource, and it's all indexed by Google. All right, so the next thing I wanted to do a little demo on, because it's one of the most common questions I get. And this is how, what if I find the perfect image on Pinterest? And I click on the image on Pinterest and there is literally no information on where it came from. Can I just use it? And the answer is probably no one will track you down for it, but it's not really the best way to do that. And there are ways to do your due diligence and try to track down where that item came from. And Pinterest drives visual resources librarians crazy because this happens all the time. They have these great images that you can't find anywhere else, but nobody puts any metadata on them to let you know where it came from or what it is or anything like that. Or it has a lot of incorrect info. Okay, so what you need to do is a reverse image search. And there are two sites that I usually recommend for this, TinEye and Google Image Search. So to sort of show you how they work, like let's look at this example of this image on the left. So there's this image that was periodically making its way around the internet as like, oh, this is funny. Look, there are, this was like an 18th century dentistry manual from Ottoman Turkey. And isn't this funny? They believed that there were demons living in your teeth causing toothaches. And it was just one of those like meme-ified things that kept making its way around. So my friend Ali Karju Ravari disproved this in a blog post, found that it was a modern painting, the teeth, over an Arabic manuscript, which probably was from the 18th century, and that's the black writing is the Arabic, and then it's sort of pseudo-Ottoman up top. Whoever did the painting wanted it to look like, Ottoman Turkish, and didn't really know how that worked. So that is modern along with the painting of the teeth. But this still kept making its way around and around and around. And I'm wondering at one point, where is this coming from? Where are people getting this image? Where is the source of it? So I went, as I usually do with questions like this, to TinEye. And that is the first place that I would generally go. So let me see if I can. So this is what happens if you go to TinEye. I'm going to make this page a little bigger. So you can upload your own image here. I already did that to save on time. And it came up with 29 results of this image. across its search of, I guess, 48.7 billion images on the internet. And you can sort it in a bunch of different ways, which is why I like TinEye. You can sort by the oldest. So you can find out when was this image uploaded to the internet for the first time. And in this case, it was October 15th, 2012. So this has been around for a long time. And you can see the file name was Ottoman Toothworms. So that was sort of the original purpose of the person who uploaded it. The other thing you can do from here, if finding the earliest image isn't necessarily what you're looking for, is you can filter by website. So you can look for, you know, what may be a more reputable website, because then they might have more information on it. In this case, the best one I found was Wikipedia. And in tracking it down, it found that it actually was on Wikimedia. And it had, oops, sorry, I'm going to go back. And on Wikimedia, it had the wrong information and everyone was using it. The good thing about Wikimedia and the bad thing about Wikimedia is that anyone can edit it. So I went in there and I edited it and I put in Ali's information and, you know, it worked. So now, hopefully it is what it should be. So Google image search is a little different. It doesn't have as many filtering options, but the good thing about Google image search is, depending on what you want to do with it, that it ranks the websites it thinks are most reputable at the top. They're not always right about that. But when you do this search on Google image search and upload this image, it brings you right to the Wikipedia page first. So in this case, that might have been a better first place to go. So those are two ways to find out where an image might have come from. And there are a lot of images that are too hard. And in that case, you know, you have to do some more digging. Now, if you remember nothing else from this little talk I'm giving right now, remember that, yes, you should cite images. Images are like any other resource. Somebody made them, somebody used them, somebody uploaded them. You should tell people where you got them from, if almost even more than text. And there are standards for how to do it. Every style manual has them. I've put Chicago up here because it's the best. No, I don't know. It's just because what most of my patrons actually use. And this basically is, this is from MIT's library website. They have a guide on how to cite images. So you can go there for more information. But basically it's the same as citing a book. You want the artist first name, the title, the year, the medium, where the artwork comes from, and then where you got the image from. So if you're looking in Harvard's image repository and you find something that's held by the Cleveland Museum of Art, you want to cite both that this artwork is in the Cleveland Museum of Art and that you found it in Harvard's repository. So the citations can get a little bit lengthy, but I mean, so can they for everything. And that way people can track down exactly where you got it. If you're going to use images for your research, the last thing I want to recommend is that you start early and be consistent. Adobe Bridge used to be something you had to pay for, but now it's free. And I think it's a really intuitive image storage project, and you can add all kinds of tags and stuff to things if you have a lot of images that you want to collect. And Tropy is an app that is still in development, but if and when we're able to go to archives again, it's largely for if you want to bring your phone and take 1 million photos of things in an archive. It lets you add the metadata to them right on the spot. It lets you add sort of all the information you need for later, and organize them into groups and stuff. So it's really, really helpful for that. But it's largely a phone app, so it's not good for photos that you already have on your computer. So that is sort of my spiel for why you should use images and when and how.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for that. Now, how do we use visual resources to write properly about the history, intellectual or otherwise, of a place, period, person, idea, or whatever?
That's a good question. And it's a question, you know, I get a lot is sort of, is it worth it? Right? You know, if you're used to dealing with texts, images can seem really scary to work with. But a lot of times it is. A lot of times you need to practice close looking when you're looking at texts as well, and incorporating images of the manuscripts you're using, for example, or even of the printed text you're using, is so important to a proper understanding of the heritage that you're studying, and just the materiality of the studies, I think is something that brings a lot to it. Of course, a lot of studies don't necessarily need images, but I really think it adds a lot to bring in the physicality of it, the feel of it. I mean, I don't know, anyone who's had a religious upbringing understands sort of how the feel of a holy text or how the sound of a service can move you, and I think that's really important for scholars to remember too, is that sometimes when we reduce religious studies to words on a page, it takes a lot away from it, a lot of context, and images are one way among many that sort of we can try to address the lived experience of religious studies in our scholarship, I think. And I mean, there are a lot of resources to help you if you aren't quite sure what's, you know, allowed within the law, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, and something I meant to address in my presentation that I forgot to is fair use, which is if you want to use images for your teaching, for example, if you want to put them in your PowerPoints, you don't need to ask permission because you're not trying to make money off of it. You're not going to try to compete with the people who created these images. So don't feel like you can't do that. The only time you will really have to ask permission is if you're, you know, publishing it in a published work. So anything for educational or personal or research use is totally allowed under US law, at least.
I mean, there's a difference in the way I see it. There's a difference between the image itself and the image being hosted or on a website. Like, as far as I know, if I get like if I find a painting online from 1874, there's like a copyright period and that's expired pretty much, and I can use that for whatever I want. But if that image was posted on like I don't know, some like archive or something like this, would there be a difference in how I use it?
That's a great question. And the answer is luckily no. So publishing, as long as that image hasn't been transformed in like some artistic way. So if you have, you know, an old photograph, anything before 1925 at this point, anything that was published before 1925 is in the public domain in the United States. So you can use it for whatever you want and don't have to ask anyone for permission. That is, again, so except for some things, you know, the death of the author is another category. But just to keep it simple, as long as it's a two-dimensional work, right? So a book page or a manuscript page or a painting, and the photograph that you're using, the reproduction that you're using, is what's called a slavish reproduction. So its only purpose is to show you what this object looks like. Then that image is also the digital image, the new image is also in the public domain. Where we get into trouble here is, for example, with pictures of architecture, because those aren't two-dimensional works. And the sort of idea there is when a photographer takes a picture of a work of architecture, angle, sunlight, all the decisions a photographer has to make before they take that photo is sort of considered their artistic contribution to that photograph. And that is sort of their right. So if you're working with architecture, it gets a little more complicated in terms of whether or not you can use those images. But a lot of the images that you'll find on a repository's website will be of artworks that they own and are taking photographs of merely to show what they look like. And therefore you'll be able to use them. And the fact that they were published online at a later date doesn't change that fact.
Thank you again, Amanda, for this excellent presentation, super informative. Before we conclude, however, I wanted to ask if you had any projects you were working on that you wanted to tell us about.
Sure. So I sort of mentioned briefly before my Stuart Cary Welch collection. And so that is a collection of 60,000 photographs taken by Stuart Cary Welch, who was a curator of Islamic art, an enthusiast of Islamic art. He was one of these aficionados who didn't have an official academic appointment, but was nonetheless very active in the art world, knew a lot of private collectors, sort of in the mid part of the 20th century. And we have all his slides that he used for research and teaching. And his family gave us the permission to put all these online open access. And it's an amazing collection because it really does have reproductions of these artworks that are either in private collections or are in state-run, museums and things that are really, really hard to get into. And Welch was also very interested in very small details. So he has really high quality photographs of very, very close-up views of paintings and manuscripts. So it's a really cool collection. We've been digitizing it for years. One project I'm trying to get off the ground. So saying it live and in public here, hopefully will make it a reality. Is one of the major artworks that we have a lot of images of, because it was sort of Welch's favorite thing was the Shahnameh of Shah Tahmasp, otherwise known as the Houghton Shahnameh, because Arthur Houghton owned this beautifully illustrated manuscript and cut it all up so that he could sell the illustrations separately at auction. And a lot of the illustrations were eventually sold to the Met. Some went back to Iran. The text block of the manuscript went back to Iran. And the rest of the illustrations are spread out in private collections and museums around the globe. But Welch was friends with Arthur Houghton and managed to photograph the manuscript before it was dispersed. So a project that I'm hoping to start with a scholar in Iran right now is trying to have a virtual reconstruction of this very important manuscript, hopefully in a page-turned format, hopefully integrating Welch's very high quality details so we can zoom in on various parts of the manuscript. And because we have these slides that are two-dimensional slavish reproductions of the manuscripts, we are legally allowed online, regardless of who owns them, at least by US law. Nonetheless, it's going to take a lot of cooperation between the various institutions that hold some of these folios. So it's something that might take quite a long time, but I think it's really important. I think it's an important manuscript, and it's a service that we can provide to a community who has not been able to see this manuscript all put together in their lifetimes. So I think it will be something that's really amazing if I can get it off the ground. And I'm going to be working on that over the next however many years it's going to take.
Excellent. Good luck with everything, Amanda. Again, thank you so much for being on the episode today. And with that, I'd like to conclude the episode.
Thank you so much for having me.